Hi everyone! So happy Friday. I'm going to read chapter 8 for you. It's a bit of a long chapter, but I'm going to try to get it done in one shot. I have my fan on, so hopefully it's not too much of a distraction. And I hope something happens in this chapter. Anything interesting. But here we go. Chapter 8. Mac usually needed 4 alarm clocks set 5 minutes apart and positioned in different places around the room to force herself to get out of bed in the morning. And that was when she got up at a reasonable time, like 8 o'clock. But last night she set all 4 clocks for 6 a.m. so she could get to the SWAT compound before Gage had to run off and save the world like he'd done yesterday. But he and half the team were already loaded up and ready to roll by the time she pulled into the parking lot, not about to let them leave without her this time. Wasn't she with them the last time? Mac jumped into the passenger seat of the SUV Gage was driving. You're perky this morning. Gage gave her a sidelong glance as he followed the big operations vehicle at the gate. Guess you slept well. She just jumped into the van. There's nothing that indicates she's perky. After everything she'd seen yesterday at the hotel, it wouldn't have been a leap to think sleep would be a long time coming last night. But she'd gone to bed with only one thing on her mind, Gage, and the thoughts of him had brought her the best night's sleep she had, well, in forever. Really? Really? Mac's smile quickly turned into a frown when she noticed the tight lines etched around Gage's mouth. He looked more exhausted than he had when he dropped her off at her place last night. Did you get any sleep last night? She asked. Yeah, I got a few hours, but unfortunately for me, I don't look as good as you this early in the morning, especially when I haven't had my coffee yet. Gage must have noticed her concern because he chuckled. Don't worry. I'm off duty for the next 2 days, so I'll be able to catch up on my rest. The look he gave her made her breath hitch. Unless I have something better to do, of course. Yeah. You've been promising that for the past 7 chapters, buddy. Like have dinner tonight? The words sounded casual enough, but her pulse was going a mile a minute. All she could think about was what happened between them the last time they had dinner together. They kissed. A grin tugged at one corner of his mouth. You feel like chambre française again? She licked her lips. I thought maybe I could make dinner for you again. Say tonight? Because, spaghetti with chicken nuggets is so appetizing. His grin broadened. Sounds good to me. Mac opened her mouth to ask what he wanted for dinner, but the radio squawked with a bunch of static. Then all those codes and police jargon Zach always translated for her. You'd think as we made this point before, I'm gonna move on. Gage picked up the hand mic and spoke a few terse sentences into it, something about maintaining the perimeter and not using any sirens. So what do we have? She asked. Drug lab. Meth, probably. He glanced at her. All business now. An anonymous caller reported all of the typical telltale signs of a meth lab. They also reported seeing automatic weapons, so the on-scene commander asked for us to go in first. Where just a few moments ago a warm, pleasurable sensation had been, now a cold, stomach-clenching fear existed. She'd almost forgotten what Gage did for a living. Are you kidding me right now? Isn't that dangerous? Well, who the fuck is gonna do it if he doesn't fucking do it? Gage shook his head. They won't even know we're coming until we kick in the door. That's why I told them to maintain the perimeter at 4 blocks. Plus, half the people in those labs are usually drugged out of their minds. We'll be in and out of there in 10 minutes. He sounded so confident and sure of himself, Mac almost found herself believing him. Then she remembered all the shooting and blood from the day before, and her stomach clenched even more tightly. Mac promised Gage she'd stay in the operations vehicle, but right after he left, the signals on the monitors kept going in and out. She supposed it was because they were parked so far away. Regardless, she couldn't see or hear anything. She wished Zach was here. He knew how to fix the darn things. She pulled her small camera from her back pocket and climbed out of the operations vehicle. She still couldn't see Gage, but at least she saw the house. Plus, she could take photos. There were half a dozen uniformed officers and detectives behind the big vehicle with her, so she was safe. After she and Gage had arrived, they'd had a short conversation with Lieutenant Weaver, the lead officer from the Narcotics Division, then instructed Trevino to take up a sniper position on the roof of a nearby building. Gage, Cooper, and Delaney had immediately disappeared around the left side of the suspected meth lab, while Xander and the other 3 members of his squad had gone around the right. Mac kept her ear glued to the radio in Weaver's hand, waiting for the signal that SWAT was about to enter the building. Gage had told her that as soon as they took the automatic weapons out of play, the rest of the cops would go in. Mac chewed on her lip as she clicked a few pictures of the house. The place didn't look like much. While it was dilapidated, there wasn't anything about the 2-story structure that made her think it was a drug lab. Usually you try to keep drug labs low-key, you don't want anybody to know that you actually have a drug lab. Granted, the paint on the casement window was a little suspicious, but a lot of homeowners did that so people on the sidewalk wouldn't be able to see into their basement. Obviously, the person who reported it to the cops knew more than she did. Apparently, a lot of people know a lot of things more than she does. We're in position. Gage's voice was soft and sure as they came to the radio. Breaching the doors in 10. Over. Mac jumped when she heard the battering rams strike the doors. It was immediately followed by a sound of flashbang grenades exploding. She braced herself for the weapon fire she knew was coming next, but there wasn't any. 10 seconds passed, then 15, but the inside of the house was quiet. That was a good thing, right? Next to her, Weaver thumbed the button on the side of the radio. Dixon, what the hell's happening in there? Gage didn't answer. Weaver swore under his breath and thumbed the button again, but whatever he was about to say was lost as a deafening boom echoed in the air. Pieces of wood, metal, and concrete sailed over the operations vehicle, raining down on Mag and the cops with her. She ducked, covering her head with her arms. What the hell? House blew. Hey, I wonder if that happens often. It took a minute for Mac to make sense of the smoking debris around her. It was Weaver shouting into his radio, ordering dispatch to send as many ambulances as they had. That finally broke through the fog enveloping her. She scrambled to her hands and knees to see around the operations vehicle. The dilapidated house-turned-meth lab was gone, leveled to the ground, and in its place was a heap of rubble. Gage. Mac was up and running across the street toward what was left of the house, as fast as her legs could move. Okay. If my guy was a SWAT guy, and I happened to be there, and the fucking house blew, I would not be running towards it. I love him dearly, I would do anything for him, but I ain't running towards a house that just fucking blew up. There are other more qualified individuals that can go there and figure out what the fuck is going on. She was halfway there when something grabbed her arm and dragged her to a halt. She fought against the grip, but it was as strong as steel and wouldn't give an inch. Max, stop! The hand on her arm spun her around and she found herself looking up at Alex Trevino. Where the hell had he come from? I have to get to Gage, she told him. He and the other guys were in there. Trevino transferred his grip to her shoulders, holding her still as he looked deep into her eyes. I know, and I'm going to get them out, but I can't do that and worry about you too. I need you to stay here. Can you do that? Yes, little fucking girl. Why don't you be a fucking adult and let the professionals get their job done? Sorry. It's just... can't. Shit bothers me. She thought she nodded, but she wasn't sure. It must have been good enough for Trevino because he ran toward the house. Mac followed despite her promise, but stumbled to a halt within a few feet. Trevino was right. She couldn't help Gage or the other men by climbing into the smoldering wreckage of the house. She'd only get in the way. Yes. So she stood there, feeling useless as the other police officers caught up and passed her. She watched as they joined Trevino in the remains of the building, shouting for the SWAT officers by name. While smoke was rising steadily from the remains of the house, there wasn't a lot of fire. That had to be good. But there was still so much damage. Most of the walls were gone, along with the roof and a good portion of the second floor. Jagged pieces of beams and steel pipes stood up in crazy angles, a testament to the force of the blast that had destroyed the place. She'd seen photos of meth labs that had blown up, but in person the aftermath was 100 times worse. Mac was almost afraid to move closer, but she couldn't hang back anymore either. As the minutes ticked by, she lost more and more hope. There was just so much damage. No one could survive a blast like that, no matter how much training they had or protective gear they wore. They're fucking werewolves, sweetheart. Don't worry. She couldn't explain why, but it felt as if she'd lost something that would have been very important in her life. Not something, someone. Max didn't realize she was crying until she tasted tears on her tongue. She choked back a sob. She couldn't stand here and watch while they pulled Gage's body from the rubble. Over here! She spun around, her heart pounding. Trevino was clawing at the chunks of concrete and pieces of brick like he was possessed. Mac hurried over, trying to see around the cops, who'd stopped searching other parts of the house and moved to help. She was afraid to hope, afraid to believe. Alex grabbed a section of what used to be part of the brick wall and tossed it aside like it weighed nothing. Underneath, there was a set of steps leading into the house and into the basement. Mac's heart beat even faster. Just because some of the SWAT officers might have made it to safety and survived the explosion didn't mean Gage had been one of them. But as Trevino reached down into the blackness, she couldn't stop hope from surging through her. A bloody hand grasped Alex's. The team sniper pulled, yanking a man from the rubble. He was covered in black soot and bloody scrapes. But there was no mistaking Xander. A uniformed cop tried to throw a thermal blanket around the squad leader, but Xander shrugged it off, instead turning to help pull someone else from the basement. Men climbed out one by one, first Cooper, then Delaney, after them Becker, Lowry, and McCall. Mac hadn't realized she'd climbed into the into the wreckage of the house until Trevino and Xander had dragged the last man out of the basement. When she saw Gage, Mac's tears flowed even harder and faster than before. He was covered in soot from head to toe, but he was alive. Thank you, God. There was another possibility of him being dead. There's nothing here that's compelling enough to say, okay, that he might die. Maxwell Weaver asked Xander if there's anyone else in the house, but she didn't hear his answer. She stumbled through the rubble at a run and threw herself in Gage's arms. She almost knocked him back down into the basement, but he didn't seem to care. He hugged her in his dirty uniform as she buried her face in the cover of his neck and cried. She completely forgot they weren't alone until she pulled away and saw Cooper standing there with a knowing grin on his face. Fucking Cooper. Embarrassed, she lifted her hand to wipe the last traces of tears from her cheeks when she caught sight of Xander's arm. He was bleeding, so were Lowry and Becker. Oh my God, I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know you guys were hurt. I saw Gage and I... The goddamn house just exploded. Holy shit, this woman. Xander's mouth edged up in what looked like a smile, though it was difficult to tell under all the soot. Don't worry about it. We're fine. Like hell you are, Weaver said. You're all a bunch of bleeding pincushions, and everyone's getting a free ride to the hospital. None of the SWAT guys looked too happy about that. Remembering how Martinez had declined medical attention when he'd been shot, Mac wouldn't be surprised if they got in their vehicles and went back to the compound to treat their cuts, scrapes, and abrasions themselves. But Gage squashed that idea. He's right. Everyone's getting checked out. No exceptions. He grinned at her, and suddenly she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. You ever ride in an ambulance before? Gage knew he wasn't the only one who was steaming mad. His entire pack would walk out of the hospital with him if he gave the word. Unfortunately, the doctors and nurses weren't going to let them out of here anytime soon, which meant he had to lie in his damn hospital bed and stew. He wasn't really mad at the medical staff. They were just doing their jobs, even if they were a pain in the ass with all their stupid tests. Look, I know you're a friggin' werewolf, but they're just doing their job, alright? No, he was pissed because that freaking meth lab they'd been lured into had been a trap, and he knew exactly who was behind it. Walter Hardy had tried to kill them, and if they'd been regular cops, he would have succeeded. The only reason they weren't dead was because werewolves were damn hard to kill. Oops. I accidentally kicked myself out of it. That said, they were still beat up. Of all of them, Xander and Becker had gotten the worst of it, which meant they'd probably be staying in the hospital overnight for observation. But as soon as Gage could leave, he was going to pay Walter Hardy a visit and let him know exactly how SWAT took care of its own. Gage dropped his head back on the pillow, stared up at the ceiling. Werewolves or not, he and his men had been lucky. They'd all sensed something was wrong the second they'd breached the doors and entered the house. Instead of coming face to face with people wielding automatic weapons, the place had been empty. It smelled wrong, too. Gage hadn't been able to place the odor, but Cooper recognized it. Gage and the others had already begun to spread through the first floor with weapons at ready when the explosive experts had shouted one word: bomb. Gage knew in his gut that there was no time to get everyone out of the house before the device detonated, especially since whoever had said it was probably somewhere nearby with his finger on the remote. Even if they had managed to escape, they would never have survived the blast and frag that went with it. That was when he'd ordered everyone into the basement. Unfortunately, he, Cooper, and Delaney had been too far away from the stairs leading under the house to even consider them, so he'd done something he rarely ever did anymore and let the beast inside free, allowing most of his upper body to shift more than it had in years. His shoulders and arms and chest had bulged and twisted so quickly it was painful, but the temporary agony was worth it as he crouched down and drove his fist into the cheap linoleum floor in the kitchen. 2 savage punches later, the floor caved in, leaving a ragged hole barely large enough for him and the other men to fit through. He shoved Cooper and Delaney ahead of him, then followed. He hadn't even hit the basement floor when the explosion came. It smashed him into the concrete of the basement floor like a jackhammer, knocking him senseless. I can see The Rock doing that. He doesn't have to be a werewolf to do that. When he came to, Cooper and Delaney were dragging him towards the far side of the basement as the floors above rained down on top of them. Thick black smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe, and he feared he'd saved his men from the blast only so they could burn to death in the fire. But luckily the fire only smoldered after the blast and the smoke cleared. In the dark of the partially collapsed basement, he, Cooper, and Delaney had crawled around until they found the rest of the pack. Becker and Xander had been trapped under hundreds of pounds of rubble, but not before they'd gotten skewered by jagged pieces of wood. While Cooper and Delaney worked quickly to free them, he searched for Lowry and found him pulling a piece of metal from his leg. Werewolves were tough and hard to kill, but they still needed oxygen like every other living thing on the planet, which was in short supply under the collapsed house. Gage had just been looking for a way out when a shaft of sunlight penetrated the darkness of the basement. Even though he and the other guys had only been trapped down there for a few minutes, it seemed like a hell of a lot longer. Probably because he'd hurt like a son of a bitch all over. But all the aches and pains had disappeared when he climbed out of the basement to see Mackenzie running toward him. She'd been crying so hard she was shaking all over. But that was nothing compared to how fast her heart had been beating. That made him hurt worse than anything. He'd wrapped her in his arms, wanting to protect her from every pain in the world. But of course he couldn't do that because she wasn't crying over his pain. She was crying over his. Hair all over the place. As dumb as it sounded, the ride to the hospital together in the ambulance had been one of the most pleasant times he'd spent with the woman. Mackenzie had simply sat beside him and held his hand, leaning on to kiss him whenever the EMT was in fussing over him. That was when he finally decided to accept Cooper's silly-ass theory that she was the one, because as far as he could tell, she was. Apparently the rest of the pack had come to the same conclusion. After seeing the way she reacted, it was obvious she wasn't playing him. Even Xander couldn't dispute that. Gage turned his head on the pillow, looking for her. She'd been in and out of his room several times over the past 2 hours, but kept getting chased at by the nurses and their damn tests. He smiled when he saw her. She was sitting in the hall with Mike and Zach. His senior squad leader had gotten to the hospital minutes after Gage, and the rest of the guys had been brought in. The photographer showed up 15 minutes later, telling Mackenzie he'd heard about the blast on the scanner. Gage was just about to get out of bed and go join them. Screw the nurses. But then he saw Mackenzie, Mike, and Zach stand up quickly. That could only mean the doctor had finally come back. About damn time. They'd been taking x-rays, running dozens of tests, and rechecking his vitals to cover their asses. He couldn't blame them, he supposed, but he needed to get out of here. He had some place to be. Dude. This machismo. The doctor walked in with Mackenzie on his heels. She looked concerned and more than a little scared. Shit. Gage hoped that look meant the good doctor hadn't told her much of anything. Zach and Mike followed with Sadie to the door. "What's the word, Doc?" Gage asked. He smiled at Mackenzie. She smiled back, and some of the aches and pains that still lingered magically felt better. "You're damn lucky, that's the word." The gray-haired man gave him a surprisingly stern look. "You came through the explosion surprisingly intact, but whatever accident you had recently caused a lot of damage. You have stress fractures to half a dozen bones, including 2 ribs and both bones of your right forearm. You shouldn't even be on duty, much less raiding a meth lab." Mackenzie's eyes were wide. "You were in an accident? When? What happened?" Gage swore under his breath. Between punching his way through the kitchen floor and getting smashed into the basement, he'd done much more damage than he thought. Because his x-rays wouldn't show much. Just a couple of 2-week-old stress fractures. Werewolves heals fast. If the doctor took x-rays again in a couple of days, they wouldn't show anything at all. But Gage would make sure that didn't happen. "It was nothing, just a training accident while rappelling. I didn't even realize I'd hurt myself," he told Mackenzie. The doctor's eyes narrowed suspiciously behind his glasses. He was probably wondering how a cop with all those stress fractures had walked around for 2 weeks without major painkillers. "I'll get some rest, Doc, promise," he added. "What about my team?" "They're doing well as can be expected, considering they almost got blown up. I'll be keeping 3 of them." He glanced down at the clipboard in his hand. "Becker, Lowry, and Riggs. They're fine, but I want to keep them overnight to watch for signs of concussion. They should be able to leave in the morning." All 3 men would hate staying here, but it was actually a good thing. Cooling his heels for the night would give Xander time to calm down, not to mention keep him from doing something stupid, like inviting himself along when Gage confronted Walter Hardy. After putting on the spare uniform Mike had brought him, Gage stopped in to see Xander, Becker, and Lowry, before meeting up with the other guys. Mackenzie hovered beside him the whole time, as she was worried she'd have to catch him any second when he fainted from exhaustion. He had to admit it was kind of cute. When they reached the parking lot, he automatically followed Mike and the others, but Mackenzie darted in front of him and put a hand on his chest. "Where do you think you're going?" "To the compound for a few hours to catch up on some paperwork," he told her. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did have to write up the incident report for the raid on the meth lab that wasn't a meth lab, but his main purpose was to find out where Hardy lived, then go scope out the place. One look at Mackenzie told him she wasn't going to cooperate with that plan. "No way," she said. "You just promised the doctor you'd get some rest, and I'm going to make sure you do. Your paperwork can wait." He'd known Mackenzie Stone was strong-willed, but he didn't know she could be so fierce, too. But damn, she looked as if she could make a grizzly bear back down. He knew where she was coming from. He really did. She'd watched someone drop a house on them, and it had scared the hell out of her. But he needed to send a message to Hardy that the shit that happened today would never be allowed to happen again, and he needed to do it fast. But as he stood there gazing down at Mackenzie, he realized something. If Cooper was right about them being cosmically connected, a possibility that was looking more and more likely by the minute, then he needed to make decisions based on what was important to her, too. That was a big leap for him. Okay, he agreed. But I have to do a brief. But I do have to brief the deputy chief on what happened today. Look, dude, even if the woman isn't the one and you're dating her, you should probably factor her into your decision-making process. This is probably why werewolves are so shitty in relationships. Seriously. She opened her mouth to protest, but Mike cut her off. I'll brief the deputy chief, he said. Go home and get some rest. Don't worry, I know what to say to Mason. Which was Mikey's way of telling him that he wouldn't say anything about the bomb to the deputy chief. If Mason knew it was an assassination attempt, he'd put the entire SWAT team in protective custody until they could bring Hardy up on charges. Luckily, it would take a while for the arson investigators to piece everything together. But Gage hesitated anyway. Then he noticed that Mike and the other men were all grinning at him. Gage shook his head. He was outnumbered. He turned his attention back to Mackenzie. She still had her hand on his chest, as if she could hold him back with nothing more than willpower. He was starting to think she probably could do it, too. So, Miss Stone, what do you have in mind? He said, to make sure I get my rest, I mean. She gave him that devastating smile. Well, I did offer to make you dinner, so how about we start with that? I don't suppose you're invited, too, Cooper asked. No, Gage said before Mackenzie could answer. But since you're being nice and filling out the paperwork on the explosions at the meth lab for me, I'll make sure Emil gets you a table at Chambre Francaise the next time you want to impress a woman. That seemed to satisfy them. As a reminder to take it easy, they headed across the parking lot, leaving Gage and Mackenzie with his senior squad leader and her photographer. Mind if I talk to Mike for a second, he said. I'm going to blow off work early. I need to make sure a few things are taken care of. Okay. Mackenzie regarded him suspiciously. Okay, but don't be too long. You need to get some rest. Gage wasn't sure how much rest he was going to get if he went home with her, but he nodded anyway. As soon as Mackenzie and Zach were out of earshot, Gage turned to Mike. I need you to find out where Hardy's going to be tonight. Mike lifted a brow. We're moving on him tonight? No, just me. I'm going to deliver a message to him. One he'll be sure to understand. Mike's brows drew together. You sure you want to do this on your own? A man like Hardy is going to have a lot of muscle protecting him, especially after what he pulled today. I know, but that'll make the message that much more effective. I'll walk in there all by myself and show him I can get him anytime I want. Gage said, I want him focused on me. I don't want him targeting the entire team like he did today. Hardy might have sent his goons to the restaurant yesterday to pick Gage up, but there was no way for the bastard to know Gage would be in that house today. He'd kill everyone on the SWAT team to get to Gage if he had to. Mike glanced at Mackenzie and Zach. They were standing beside the photographer's car talking. I'll text you the information, he said. But how the hell are you going to step away from Mac? She's not stupid. If you say you're running to the store for a carton of milk, she's going to know what you're up to, and I don't think she's the kind to let you do it. No kidding, she's already looking at him impatiently. Then I guess I'll have to make sure she's so exhausted when I leave that she won't know I'm gone. And he knew exactly how to do it. Ew, manipulative, not okay. That's not why you use sex. I think I'm going to end on that note that the chapter's not over, but I'll read the rest of it tomorrow because have a good Friday, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.